Okay, so I don't have the bird that looks like the bird from Up. I don't have any toys that look like that, unfortunately. Ironically, I think my church had one for a while, but I have no idea what happened to it after COVID. But so I have a peacock. They're colorful anyway. So yeah. And then of course I'm going to be talking about Up today from 2009, from Pixar, and I needed something to go with all the dogs. So we have the peacock and a bunch of dogs and 3 Pokemon. Rainy may decide to make an appearance later in the video. I have no idea. It depends on whether or not he decides to come up from downstairs. So, as I said, this is going to be my review of the Pixar movie Up. It came out in 2009. I heard jingling. He may come in. We'll see. And this is, of course, the story of Carl Fredricksen. The movie starts when he's about 8 years old, and he's, this kid in the movie theater watching the film reels of Charles F. Muntz, who is this, he's this explorer and everything, and he has this, air dirigible, hot air balloon, or not hot air balloon, Zeppelin, that is called the Spirit of Adventure. And, he flies around the world in it, and he's got, like, all these, dogs that he has that are part of his crew that are all well-trained and everything, and he's, been all over the world and, got fossils and different things like that, and he, like, finds this really amazing bird fossil in South America, and he ends up, getting discredited as an adventurer and an archaeologist and everything. And he's like, well, I'm going to go and I'm going to find the bird and, like, prove everybody wrong. I don't know, my light source is being weird. I apologize if that's affecting the video. That works better. And of course, Carl Fredricksen is this, huge fan of him, and, he's, playing on his way home from the movie theater, and he ends up coming across this girl named Ellie, and she's also a fan of Muntz, and they end up making this friendship, and he results in having a broken arm, and then she's, like, coming to make him feel better, and they're very much the opposite of each other. Carl is very quiet and shy and reserved, and then Ellie is very outgoing and very in your face and everything like that. Very opposite of each other. But, we see that she has her adventure book, and she wants to go to all these different places and, be an explorer, go to Paradise Falls. I apologize for technical difficulties throughout this video. And what ends up happening is, of course, the two of them, they grow up and they end up getting married. And, throughout the whole course of, their relationship, it's, she's kind of been like the spearhead of it. She's, like, been driving them, years, driving them, different places and everything like that. And, like she's, I would not be surprised at all if Ellie is the one that proposed to Carl in that essence. And of course, the first chunk of the movie, setting up, who Carl and Ellie are, we find out that, they had wanted to have a baby at one point, but that doesn't happen because it's probably she's infertile or suffers a miscarriage, is how they put it in the movie. So Carl is basically like, okay, well then we'll just keep trying to save up money to go to Paradise Falls because that's where they've both wanted to go for a very long time. And, during this whole time frame, she's a tour guide at the zoo and he's a balloon salesman at the zoo because, reasons. We watch them grow old and still, be very much in love and very happy, but they have to keep dipping into their savings, fix the tire, fix the house, this other stuff. And then Ellie gets sick. When, they're both, much older, Ellie gets sick, and then eventually she does die, unfortunately. And of course, all of this has gone over in just like the first, 8 minutes of Up tops. Unfortunately, Ellie passes, and then Carl kind of, I wouldn't say he goes into a depression. I would say that he goes into just kind of a set routine funk type of things. Like, he doesn't want to do anything different. He's, still his same routine every morning, every day, continuing on and on and on. And what ends up happening is, of course, after Ellie passes, we cut to a little while after. I don't remember if we get an exact time frame, but, Carl has turned into this, grumpy old man and everything. And He's now this grumpy old man, and he's like, I'm set in his ways and everything like that. And he's still lives in the same old house that they found, that they played in when they were kids, and they bought and they fixed up and everything. And he still lives there, and he's it's a way of him keeping Ellie close to him, is having the house, of course. And there's this huge land development thing going up around him, and it's this big corporation is like has bought all the houses, and he's like the last little house on the area. And it's just like, well, everybody's trying to get him to sell his house and everything, and Carl is just like, no, I'm not doing that. And unfortunately what ends up happening is Carl ends up getting kind of flipping out on one of the construction workers because they accidentally break his mailbox, and then he accidentally hits them, and he ends up having to go to trial, and he doesn't go to jail, but he has to go to trial, and he ends up basically getting, maybe it's time for you to go and live in a retirement home. And he's, this is his last chance to be in the house, and he's, decided that he's just going to fulfill his promise to Ellie of just like, I'm going to go to Paradise Falls. I'm going to do this. And we cut to the next morning, two of the orderlies, the nurses from the Shady Oaks Retirement Village, show up, and they're going to take him away, and he's, sends them off, saying, I was just going to say one last goodbye to the old place, and they send, and they head off, and then, of course, we have the moment of thousands of balloons pop up from under the house, from behind the house, because he's a balloon salesman and apparently has access to, like, the state's supply of balloons and helium at any given moment. He can make that request. It's like, I'm calling in a favor and I need it done tonight. I need all the helium you have and all the balloons you have. I love that. And it's just like, balloons lift house. Oh, God. And, the house is flying, lifting and flying over the city, and everybody is just like, the reaction you get if you see a house flying by you being carried by balloons of, okay, maybe I do need medication, would have been my answer to that. If I saw that happen, I'd be like, find someone near me. You saw the house too, right? Yes. Oh, good. I'm sure that's what happens for several of the people in this movie. It's just like, hi, I would like to schedule an appointment with my therapist. Is it about the balloon house? Oh, good God, thank God I'm not the only one that saw it. It's like, that would be that moment there. I love that. And we're also, of course, introduced to, during the first part, we're introduced to Russell, who is a wilderness explorer, so like a Boy Scout, Eagle Scout type of thing, of course. And he is very dedicated to trying to assist the elderly to become a senior wilderness explorer, of course. And he's very adorable. And he's a little bit, like, he's very trusting at times, of course, but, like, he ends up being on Carl's house when it, starts flying. And, Carl had been trying to get rid of Russell, like, just make him leave him alone by, like, tricking him into going to find a snipe, which is, just made-up animal. And during that, he was trying to find the snipe, and then he ended up on the house, and he's, like, carried away with the house. And, Carl explains that he's going to take the house to South America, to, Paradise Falls. I was about to say Gravity Falls, which is weird because I've never actually watched Gravity Falls. Okay, I've seen part of an episode, and I still don't know what I think of the series. It involved a weird talking triangle eyeball thing. I don't know. Probably not the best place to start for the series. But, yeah, Gravity Falls, Paradise Falls, big difference. And what ends up happening is, Carl tries to think of a way to get, like, Russell off the house without hurting Russell. That doesn't go well. He's like, nah, I can't do that. And they end up flying into this big storm, which I just love the imagery that they have. Some of the just giant, like, landscape images that they have in this movie, where you see, like, the house in comparison to how high it is from the ground, and even, like, the house, specifically the house with all the balloons in comparison to, like, the giant storm that they're flying into. And, you know, so they're flying in the house. I don't remember if we get an exact, like, within location, like, within the country that, like, kind of where Up is taking place. Because, like, they fly down to South America. And I think it's hinted that they have to go to, like, Venezuela. But but I don't remember exactly, like, how far that would be. So it's just like, well, it's not like you're going at, like, jet engine speeds faster than the speed of sound. You're flying in a house. So it's going to take you a little while to get there. But Carl ends up having to run around the house and, like, try to stop all of his stuff from breaking because he doesn't want all of his stuff to be broken. Fair enough. And, like, Russell ends up actually steering the house back, you know, steering the house down to, you know, South America with his GPS. And, you know, they get there and Carl doesn't believe him. And what ends up happening is, you know, they arrive there and they end up getting they almost crash into the, you know, the other side of the falls because it's just kind of crescent shape and they're on the other side of it. And Russell just keeps trying to get him to get Mr. Frederick Carl to, like, let him help because it's just, like, assisting the elderly and everything. And we get, like, this, you know, the whole thing of just, like, okay, they're, like, both tied to the house. Like, Carl has, like, the hose tied around him. And, you know, Russell has, you know, like, whatever, you know, like, his, like, bungee cord attached to the house or whatever. And they're, like, walking, you know, they're going to walk the house across to the other side of the falls and put it where it's supposed to be. Because that was always Ellie's dream of, you know, having a house at Paradise Falls. So that's what Carl wants to finally do. And, you know, that's their intention. And during this time frame, of course, they end up coming across this giant, frickin' colorful bird that gets nicknamed Kevin. Even though, of course, we find out later that it's a girl. I also have a manager at work whose name is Kevin. And he is a very nice manager and everything. But, you know, it's just like Kevin. Every time they say Kevin in a movie, I would pop back to my manager. I'm just like, nope, not Kevin. Not that Kevin. I do not have a boss that is a giant tropical bird that likes chocolate. And, like, of course, Kevin starts following Carl and Russell around and everything. Like, kind of, like, wants to make Russell its baby, her baby. Because, of course, they don't know that it's a girl yet. But what ends up happening is during that time frame, they also end up coming across Doug. I love Doug. Doug, the talking dog. Of course, we find out that, like, all of the dogs in this movie have, like, you know, these, like, translator collars on them that allow them to, like, have their thoughts, of course, be understood. You know, their thoughts, their speech be understood by the humans around them because, you know, that's what Charles Muntz made. And what ends up happening is, you know, they come across Doug, and he's, of course, the whole thing of, like, you know, I have just met you, and I already love you. You know, I love, you know, it's the whole thing of dogs is, like, you know, they meet a person, and if they're, you know, if they're a nice dog and they meet a person, they really like the person right away type of a thing, you know. Rainey is an adopted dog. I've mentioned this before. You know, he's very friendly, you know, little kids love, he's very good with, like, little kids coming up and, like, wanting to, like, you know, can I pet the puppy? Yes, pet puppy, you know. And then, you know, and, like, all the dogs are, of course, all the dogs are, like, trained and everything. And, like, Doug, of course, wants to take Kevin as his prisoner and everything. And, you know, Carl just thinks that Doug talking is a weird trick. And, of course, we have that squirrel. Hi. And, of course, you know, throughout the whole time frame, you know, they're like, still traveling to try to carry, you know, float the house over, walk the house across, you know, Paradise Falls. And during this time frame, we were also introduced to these three other dogs, Alpha, Beta, and Gamma, who are, of course, like, the Alpha is, of course, the lead dog. He's this big kind of Doberman dog, I believe. And then, of course, there's Beta and Gamma, who are, like, his second in command. And Doug is actually the kind of the quote-unquote runt of the litter, in the fact that, like, he's not that smart and he's not very fierce. And, like, he fails at missions a lot of the time. And, you know, and all the dogs have their collars, of course. And, of course, Alpha is just kind of busted, and he kind of sounds like he has a very high squeaky voice, and he sounds like a chipmunk. So just, you know, Alvin and the Chipmunks. And of course, all the dogs laugh at that and everything. And, like, they had sent Doug off on, like, a special mission to go and try to find the bird. and he like reports in that he found the bird. And of course they end up like, I love the whole dog jokes in this movie because there's a squirrel. And of course the dog jokes in the movie are just funny, in the fact that like they see like Russell at one point and there was like, oh my god, who's that tiny mailman? I'm like, you guys have been, how do you know what a mailman is? I mean, like, well, I guess, I don't know, I would assume Muntz has like lots of like access to like whatever form of technology was there at the time frame, at the 1930s or 40s or whatever it was when he headed down to South America at the time. But how does the dog know what a mailman is? All of you are like descendants of the descendants of the descendants of the dogs that were originally with Muntz. So I'm like, how did that work? Did he have like someone? I have whole questions about Muntz. Like, did he have like continuous supplies being brought down to him? You know, what happened with that? Like, how was he getting all of his supplies for the past, I don't know, 70, 80, whatever years? Because I don't remember if we have an exact age on Carl. There's like theories about how old Carl is, but we don't know exactly. But it's just like, so how was he getting supplies and getting more dogs and everything? Because eventually, you breed the dogs with each other enough times, you're going to have like a whole gene pool that's just not very broad, which is not good for diversity within dog breeds. And a lot of them still seem to be like purebreds. Because like the alpha is like a Doberman Pinscher, and I think there's like a couple of pit bulls and some other ones, of course, all over the place. And I think Doug is supposed to be like a lab or something like that. Very sweet, kind dog. Not that all dogs can't be sweet and kind. I've been around different, because I've been around Pinschers. I haven't been around Doberman Pinschers. I've been around, what are they? Boxers, and they're very sweet dogs. So it's like dogs are just, their disposition can be determined based on the owner. But what ends up happening is, they track down where Doug is, and they end up chasing Doug, they end up chasing away Kevin, the bird, of course. And we'd have like this moment where Carl and Russell end up having this talk, because Carl, is like, well, hasn't your dad ever taken you camping before and everything? I was like, well, he used to, but he doesn't do any of that with me anymore, and I haven't seen him for a while. But he said he would come to my ceremony when I become a senior wilderness explorer and put the pin on me and everything. And we have this moment where like Carl's like sitting there, and he finds out, of course, that Russell's parents are divorced, and then his dad's off with like another woman or his secretary or whatever, and like it's not around, and it's just kind of like Russell and his mom, and he just wants to spend time with his dad again. And so we see that throughout that part of the movie, where it's like the two of them kind of getting to know each other, like Carl kind of assuming that he like misread some things about Russell and everything. And Carl then kind of tells Russell that now you're a member of the Ellie's Adventure Club type of thing. And at one point, like, because Carl kind of keeps talking to like the house like it's Ellie, and like Russell at one point like is like talks to the house too about like, can I have Kevin as a pet? Squirrel. And what ends up happening is they end up getting trapped by, like, Alpha and Beta and Gamma and some of the other dogs show up, and they, like, chase, they try to get to Kevin, and Kevin runs away or goes and hides. And what ends up happening is Carl and Russell and Doug kind of get, like, led back to where Charles Muntz is. And they end up finding that Charles Muntz is still alive, which is kind of hinted at this point in time in the movie anyway. Or before this point in time in the movie anyway, because it's like this very pivotal character that's very inspirational. It's just like, no, he's just gone. It's just like, no, you're gonna run into it. And they end up finding Charles Muntz himself, and Carl knows exactly who Charles Muntz is and everything, and like Charles and Carl, I'm gonna go back and forth. Muntz is what I'm gonna call Charles Muntz. Muntz ends up like seeing them at the house, and he's just like, oh, so that's why you're down here. And I was just like, well, that'd be a very stupid reason if it wasn't true. It's like, how else are they going to get down there with the house? Besides flying it down. And he, like, invites them into, into the spirit of adventure for dinner and everything. And, like, they get to look over his treasures and everything. And during this time frame, Doug unfortunately gets put into the cone of shame, which we haven't had to put Rainey in a cone of shame. But the dog that we had before Rainey, like 10 years before we had Rainey, 8-9 years before we had Rainey, Bear, he a few times, because of like surgeries that he'd had to have the cone of shame, just to make sure that he doesn't lick anything that he's not supposed to, of course, which is what the cone of shame is supposed to do. Although at times I think maybe giving Rainey a cone of shame might at least make him behave a tiny bit better. But it's, he's, Doug is sad. I am in the cone of shame. We have those moments. And during Carl and, Russell, like, seeing everything that's inside of Muntz's ship, the different fossils, different other artifacts that he has and everything, like, he's telling them stories and everything. Some of it is kind of obviously a BS story, because he mentioned something about, like, I used to play cards with Roosevelt. I'm like, Theodore Roosevelt? Because I don't think the other one was that adventurous, and I don't think you're that old, type of thing. And it's like, so we never get an age on Muntz either exactly, but he was like, he was fully grown when Carl was a kid, so he's at least, a good 25-ish years older than Carl, and Carl's at least in his 70s at this point in time, if not older than that. So Muntz is around, 100 years old at that point in time. And and they end up having dinner, and what ends up happening, unfortunately, is, Muntz mentions about, trying to find the bird and everything that keeps escaping him, and he's been down here for so many years trying to find it to prove that he wasn't lying. And he's just so hell-bent on that, and that's what he's been hell-bent on for the past, however many years, 60, 70, whatever many years at this point in time, focusing in on trying to find the bird to prove that he's not crazy, to prove that he didn't lie and make it up and everything. And he's gone down the rabbit hole of just, like, he literally behind him, he has, like, the conspiracy theory board, I swear to God, is what it looks like, with, like, the notes and everything all around it, like circles and diagrams all over the place. And he's, like, gone very obsessive over it. And that's been his goal for the whole time that he's been down there. And, Russell's like, well, that looks like Kevin. Yeah, Kevin's my new bird friend I trained to follow us. She really likes chocolate. And, we find out that Kevin is actually hiding on the house at this point in time, hiding on the, Carl's house that's parked right next to the Spirit of Adventure. So it's not like the house is going to float away, but Kevin is very much within the enemy's lair at this point in time. And Carl is, like, as he's watching Muntz talk, he's, like, figuring out that, yeah, he used to be my childhood hero, but I kind of think he's lost it a little bit over the past, lifetime. And he's like, he tries to get Russell to stop talking. It's like, oh, the bird flew away. It won't come back, type of a thing. I shoot it off or whatever. And, like, the bird didn't like Kevin did not like Russell initially. It, like, kept hissing at Russell, and, like, it would, like, hiss and growl at, like, Doug and everything, which it makes sense because, the whole experience that the bird has had with, old men and with dogs has all been bad. So it's just like, small child is okay. Floating house thingy, okay. Old man, don't know. Dog, no. At least not at that point in time. And, so we see that squirrel. And we end up seeing that, Russell and Carl try to escape, and, Muntz tries chasing after them, and they end up, getting on the house, or getting, taking the house with them, and trying to escape that way, and try to get Kevin to a safe place. And Kevin unfortunately gets hurt during this time frame, and like they have to like bandage her up, and like they have to like carry her on the house because she can't run, because she's usually really, really fast, like fast enough to evade traps and different things like that. But since she's injured, she can't do that because one of her legs got hurt, so she can't run, and she has to get back to her babies that are within like this maze rock area where like they're safe. And so they're trying to like carry her on the house and everything. Like Carl and Russell are getting along a little bit better at this point in time, but Muntz ends up sending the dogs after them. And, Doug ends up getting out of the cone of shame and everything. And, Doug almost actually ends up falling very, very far at one point in time, but he shows up and he helps Russell and Carl. And then unfortunately, Muntz still shows up, and he ends up almost trying to set the house on fire. And Carl is more worried about saving the house than trying to help Kevin. And what ends up happening is, Muntz ends up like capturing Kevin and like dragging her onto his ship to like take back as like a living specimen to prove that he wasn't lying about the bird that he found. And Carl is much more focused on the house at this point in time, and like Russell is just very angry, which I don't blame Russell for being really, really angry at that point in time. But Russell and Carl end up, well, Carl's the one taking the house, Russell is just kind of still following him, and they get the house to where it's supposed to be on Paradise Falls. And like Russell has kind of like, he threw down his, because he's got like the sash on him with all the different badges and everything. And I was a Girl Scout, I was in Brownies, whatever you want to call it. I was in that. I know that nowadays there's more about like, letting the girls into the Boy Scouts and letting the boys into the Girl Scouts and everything. And I'm like, I can see where that's coming from, but I'm not going to worry about that. I'm not going to make a comment about that in this video, but let's put it this way. I hated selling cookies when I was a Girl Scout because there were a bunch of other Girl Scouts in my area. And even when it's just like, oh, well, I can sell cookies at my, where my parents worked, it's like, oh, well, you're not supposed to do that here. And then like, I would, I didn't want my parents getting in trouble or whatever. So yeah, fun thing there. But so it's just like, don't care for that anymore. I never really cared for the Girl Scout cookies anyway. Yeah. People get angry that I said that. But, Russell is just like, he doesn't care about that anymore. He's like, throwing down his sash, doesn't care about that. And Carl, like, they just have this fight. And, like, Carl goes into his house and he sits in his chair. Like, we see these, like, throughout the course of the movie, we've seen, like, these comparisons between Ellie and Carl. Throughout the house. It's like Carl's stuff has much more of like the square or the boxy shape to it, and then Ellie's has much more of the rounded out shape to it and everything, to just kind of by the rules, by the book, and kind of a little bit more let's see what happens type of thing is kind of like what they're supposed to show between the two of them, and then like they balance each other out. And what ends up happening is Carl sits down in the house in his chair, and he's like looking at Ellie's adventure book, and he's like looking through it, and like it's her, pictures of her as a kid, and then it's the whole stuff I'm going to do page, and he like starts to close the book because he just thinks that like she never added anything to the book after that point in time, and he starts to close it, and then like part of the page falls away, and it's like he turns it, and it's their wedding photo, and then like he's sitting there and he's like turning his way through the pages, and it's pictures of them over the years, having fun and being happy, and when they first bought the house, and when even when they were older and everything, and how they still stayed in love for that long, and even though they didn't have kids, they were still very happy. And like Carl had spent the whole time that he's been trying to pull the house down and everything, that he had thought, of course, and this is kind of where the whole concept, where the whole the crux of the movie is that Carl spent this whole time thinking that Ellie didn't have this adventure she wanted to go on. She didn't get the chance to go and see the world, go to Paradise Falls and everything like that the way that she wanted to go. And shortly before she had passed, before she got sick, Carl had finally bought the tickets for them to use to go down to go on their trip, but she passed away before they could do that. And so, Carl has spent this whole time under the impression that Ellie didn't think she got to go on this adventure. And like, as he's looking through everything in the book, all the pictures and everything of like the two of them together or him or, whatever, he's just befuddled by the fact that she did have her adventure and that he was her adventure. And I love that. I mean, I've tie back to my life. I mean, like my grandparents on my mom's side, they met during World War II. And I don't know if I've mentioned this before on the channel or not, but like they met during World War II. My grandfather was a soldier in World War II. He was, going to be shipping out. And we live in Nebraska. Nebraska was a big place for like, soldiers were brought here, then shipped out, train out east or out west, depending on where they were headed. And, my grandfather was from Nebraska anyway. And like they had this, they would always have like big send-off parties and everything. And like that night at the big send-off party, like my grandmother was there at the party and, the two of them ended up dancing. And that's how they met. And, throughout, however much of the war was left, they would write letters to each other and everything. And, he came home, thankfully, or I wouldn't exist because none of my mom and her siblings wouldn't exist because they didn't get married until after, World War II finished. But, and they had 7 kids together. And, but my grandfather died like 45, 50 years, something like that, before my grandmother did. And my grandma spent like that whole, like another half of her life, because she lived to be in like, after, her mid, early 90s before she passed away. And she had all these other adventures. She went to all these other places and had like, she had, all of her kids and lost kids along the way, unfortunately. And she has had grandkids and great grandkids and, it's the journey isn't, it's like, the adventure is the journey is the destination, blah, blah, blah. Yeah, I do sometimes agree with that, but it's this whole thing of you don't have to go anywhere to have your adventure. You can have your adventure within your own hometown. You can have your adventure and never leave your hometown. Ellie is trying to tell Carl, and she probably should have showed him the adventure book beforehand, but then we wouldn't have the movie and the lesson of the movie. She has the adventure book that shows that you were my adventure. And of course, the last page in the book is, thanks for the adventure. No, go have a new one. And, Carl takes that upon himself to literally be, okay, this is what I'm going to do. I have to do the right thing. I have to do what would have made Ellie proud of me because it's the right thing to do. And, he goes outside and he tries to stop Russell from going off because Russell, like, takes a bunch of the balloons and then, like, a leaf blower, like, is trying to blow himself toward where the spirit of adventure is before it, like, lifts off. And Carl then basically spends, like, however much time, like, shoving everything out of his house that he doesn't need anymore. Furniture, clothes, books, everything out of the house. Anything that's not, like, nailed down, and probably some stuff that was. Just getting it out of the house, all the windows get broken and like shattered and everything, like everything's thrown out of the house, and like the house starts slowly rising up because like so many of the balloons have been popped at this point in time that I can't really move it too much at this point in time with everything still inside of it. So he like shoves all that stuff out of the house and it rises up and it starts floating again. And of course we have the 2 chairs, Ellie's chair and Carl's chair, sitting next to each other. They're on, right by Paradise Falls, and like Carl's, the house is like flying off. And, flying toward where the Spirit of Adventure is. And of course, Russell had gotten onto the Spirit of Adventure, and we have the moment where, all of the, Russell gets onto the ship and he's trying to get to where Kevin is, and Carl ends up getting to the ship, flies the house to the ship. And it's, I love the fact that like via like stuff happens and like Carl gets into the ship and like Doug is there, and like Doug had been like hiding under the porch, and he like gets onto the house when Carl was flying off, and Doug is like, I was hiding under your porch because I love you, master. And Carl is like, well, you're my dog, aren't you? So you get in the house. And that type of thing of, good dog, Doug, and like all of that. And so they get to the house, or they get the dirigible, they get the house to the dirigible, and the Zeppelin dirigible, whatever you want to call it. And they get there, and they get on, and like Doug helps Kevin, or helps Carl get to where Kevin would be. And Russell kind of got captured, and he's kind of not in a good spot, and he almost falls out of the ship, but he's saved by like Russell, or by Carl and Doug. And what ends up happening is Carl had tried to put Russell into the house to keep Russell safe while they went to go save Doug, because like Russell is like tied to a chair, and somehow Russell gets off the chair. I don't remember how exactly, but he does. And Carl sneaks into the ship, and he ends up distracting the dogs, getting them away from where Kevin is, because he has his cane, and his cane has like the tennis balls on the bottom, and like he takes one of the tennis balls and like, who wants the ball? Who wants the ball? And like throws it, and like, all the dogs chase after the ball, and he walks them out of the room, like gets Kevin out of the cage. And what ends up happening is Muntz, leaves the control room to go and, try, and we basically get a fight between two old men, which is just epic and fun anyway. And like they're fighting around all of these fossils, and like they keep having moments where it's like they try lifting swords above their head, and they're just like, my back, ow, my back, all of that, like cricks and sore spots and everything. And like, I love the whole concept of like, during the pitch meeting for this, was it, okay, we get everything going and blah, 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 and then we're gonna have the two old men fight each other. Why? Well, we want to. It's an interesting way of doing things, and it's a fun thing to have happen. How often do you see old men fight each other in a movie? Go watch a Clint Eastwood movie. But no, I actually kind of want to see Up with Clint Eastwood as Carl. I don't think that would be a good idea, though. No, I don't think that would go over well. I was trying to remember, I was like, run through canon in my head of like, has Clint Eastwood ever played an animated character? I don't know. I don't think so. Clint Eastwood does not strike me as the type to play an animated character, but I could be wrong. And if he has, I apologize for not knowing that. But what ends up happening is, Carl and, Muntz are fighting all over the ship, and, Doug is dealing with the other dogs, and Doug actually ends up getting Alpha stuck inside of the cone of shame. It's not the actual cone of shame, but it's close enough. And, like, that basically, in the other dog's eyes, makes Doug Alpha, makes Doug the new Alpha of the pack, the new leader of the pack, because he defeated the previous Alpha, which is usually the way that it works, as far as I'm aware. And what ends up happening is, so Doug's now in charge of all the dogs, and Carl and Muntz, of course, end up fighting. They end up on the outside of the ship, and like the house ends up there, and like there's this whole moment where it's like they have, Kevin is safe, and Kevin is kind of safe, and Muntz is like chasing Carl and Kevin around the ship and up onto the, the outside of the ship, and Russell has steered the house back to the ship itself, steered the house back to the Spirit of Adventure and the Zeppelin. And what ends up happening is, they get there, and like they're getting, they get Carl, or Kevin, Russell, and Doug are like in the house, and like they've closed the door, and like Carl is like holding on to the house, so it won't fly off, but like they, Muntz popped a bunch of the balloons, so the house isn't really going to go very well, and even if it does go, it's going to fall because there's not enough, lift left on the house for it to, not fall like a rock. Well, I wouldn't say fall like a rock, but it would like fall pretty quickly even at this point in time. And what ends up happening is, Muntz has his gun and he's trying to bust into the house, and we have this moment where Muntz gets into the house and he's about ready to attack Kevin and Russell and Doug, and Carl basically has to do the whole thing of like choose between the house and them. Of course, he chooses them, which is kind of the choice he already made at this point in time when he like shoved everything out of the house and like flew the house off to go and help save Kevin. And what ends up happening is Carl, he has the chocolate and he like waves that at Kevin, and Kevin like, Russell and Doug are like holding on to Kevin, like Kevin jumps through the window, and Muntz tries to jump through the window, gets caught, and he falls, and the house falls. But Doug and Kevin and Russell are all safe because like they managed to grab onto like there was like this windy hose rack that was on the house that like they kept using to drag the house around, and like they grabbed onto that and they didn't fall. And like, Carl dragged them back up onto the Spirit of Adventure, and they get back inside, and like now they're the ones that are in charge of the Spirit of Adventure at this point in time. And we get this moment where now they're all gonna they take Kevin back to where her babies are, and like so they see the little babies, and the little babies are so cute. I love them. And Carl and Russell and Doug are just like having fun with the little babies, and like Kevin, they say goodbye and everything, and like they had Carl and Russell like fly the Spirit of Adventure back to their town. And what ends up happening is, all the dogs are there, and like now all the dogs will listen to, listen to Carl because like he defeated their leader, their master, technically killed their master, but we're gonna leave that alone, and we're gonna leave that alone for now. But what ends up happening is, they fly back to their town. And like when they look down, they see that the house did actually land right on Paradise Falls, where it was supposed to be for like what Ellie's dream was. And they get back to like the community center where like there's going to be the senior wilderness explorer ceremony and everything. And Russell's father doesn't show up, but Carl is there, and he pins on the Ellie badge. That's the grape juice badge, the grape juice bottle cap badge that he pins on Russell. And then they sit and they have they go to the place in town that has ice cream, and like they sit there and they have ice cream, and just like sit and watch, and like the Spirit of Adventure is just like hovering over the ice cream place, which is just funny. It's just so funny. I love it. And they end up seeing they're like sitting there like counting cars and talking and everything. Like Doug is next to them, and I'm assuming all the other dogs are on the dirigible at this point in time. But like we see like Russell's mom was at the ceremony, and all the dogs are at the ceremony. And then over the credits, we have lots of different pictures of like this new adventure book that they made, that like Carl made, that's like detailing his adventures with Russell and with Doug and with all the other dogs and everything. Like, Carl does go and goes to live at like the retirement community and everything, and he does lots of different things. Like Russell comes and plays bingo with him, and like they find homes for like all the dogs from the ship and everything. And like just like the two of them, all three of them having a lot of fun and everything. And I love how they do that over the credits. In regards to the cast, we of course have Ed Asner as Carl Fredricksen. And I'm pointing this out here because Ed Asner, or Edward Asner, has also voiced a different Disney character that I love, and that is Hudson from Gargoyles. So he was the older gargoyle on the oldest kind of gargoyle on Gargoyles. I loved Gargoyles. I would love it if they had, like, depending on how they would do a remake, that would be interesting. A continuation would be good too. And we have Christopher Plummer. May he rest in peace. Also, Ed Asner, may he rest in peace. Christopher Plummer was Charles F. Muntz. Of course, Christopher Plummer, Knives Out, so many other movies. Sound of Music is, of course, what I associate most with him, with growing up and everything. We have Bob Peterson as Doug, and he is a golden retriever. We have Pete Docter as Kevin, and Pete Docter is the director of the movie, so he also does the voice for the big, colorful Clarice history for Kevin, which is just funny. Elizabeth Docter, who is Pete Docter's daughter actually does the voice of young Ellie, because the older Ellie never actually speaks in the movie. It's just all like young Ellie at the beginning of the movie. Let's see here. Not really too much else. We do have John Ratzenberger as Tom, who's like one of the construction site workers. So the obligatory John Ratzenberger pops up in the movie. For side things for this, there's Doug's Special Mission, which is just like a Pixar short that they have that centers around Doug going off on his like little adventure, his mission to go to try to find Kevin, and like it ends when he finds Carl and Russell, where they meet up in the movie. And then the other side one that they have is George and AJ, which is just another Pixar short that is about the two hospital workers. The two guys that were supposed to show up and take Carl to Shady Oaks, but that doesn't go so well for them. So it's just like this bad day that they have. Then much more recently, they had on Disney Plus, they have Doug Days, which is came out last year in 2001. I have not watched it yet. I do still want to because it looks adorable. It is a mini series where they have just like little short episodes of Carl and Doug's life after what happens with Up, and it's Carl sold the Spirit of Adventure, and he uses that money to purchase just this new house in suburbia for him and Doug to live in. And then the course of the series is just like these different adventures that they have. There's an episode called Squirrel. Hi. And like different episodes that talk about I guess different little adventures. There's like 4 or 5 episodes, so it's not that long, but I just have to watch it. They're all about like Doug's antics and everything. And the series itself was actually dedicated to Ed Asner because he passed away last year. And the final episode is, and it's his final performance as well, because he came back to record the voice of Carl for it, because I guess he really loved playing Carl in the for Up, and he came back and voiced Carl for Doug Days. And the series itself is dedicated to his memory, because he either passed away just before the series started, or just just when they were finishing up airing it or so. But I still need to watch that. I don't believe there's anything else in like regards to like side things for Up, because I don't remember there being anything. There's no Kingdom Hearts things for Up as far as I'm aware. Not that I can think of. There's not. Not really. I don't think there's really anything else side stuff for Up. In regards to like just like expanded Disney or Pixar universe. Not that I can think of. So that's what we have for Up. I think the next one would be, I think the next one is supposed to be Toy Story 3, if I remember correctly. But I think that's correct. If not, then it's whatever else is next, but I just don't remember what that is off the top of my head. So that's what I have. I thank you very much for watching. I hope that you enjoy the movie. I had debated about trying to get some balloons into the background, but knowing my luck, they would have just gotten tangled around the fan on the ceiling, and that wouldn't have gone well. So yeah. Oh well. Thank you for watching. Have a nice day. Bye. My name is Doug. I have just met you, and I love you.